some towns that had not got a fire brigade or had lost one, round here for instance Milnrow, and didn't have a fire brigade from about 1920 onwards because it went defunct, they had to form an auxiliary fire service or some sort of fire service at the start of the war, so they did. The Area Precautions Act required an auxiliary fire service to be formed in each town. There was a completely separate piece of legislation called the Fire Brigades Act, which said that each town had to make arrangements for, this is to do with peacetime, had to make arrangements for fire services to be covered. Because they all came out at the same time, it all sort of blurred into one. So Rochdale had a fire brigade and an auxiliary fire service. Milnrow had an auxiliary fire service. And instead, for its regular fire brigade, or to cope with the Fire Brigades Act, it did that by paying Rochdale to come and help it out. And a lot of small towns did that. So the fire brigade in the likes of Milnrow was an auxiliary fire service, or an AFS, and there was a lot of improvisation went on in there. The people would be part-time. The equipment would be a mixture of sort of improvised Heath Robinson fire engines and a little bit of equipment that was issued by the government. So they could be converted lorries, converted taxis, converted ice cream vans, anything, you know. They really had to make do and mend, and it was like Dad's army in the fire service.
Exactly like that, the van with the boat, you know.
Just the same. Yeah. They were, you know, making weapons out of brooms and things. Firemen were making fire engines out of old cars. Just the same thing.
It's one of my favourite.
It is, and it's all true, isn't it, of course. Yeah. Albert Mill in Milnrow on the main street there, I think it's called New A Road at that point, or it just changes from Dale Street, was the centre for the auxiliary fire service. There is of course an old Milnrow fire station on the other side of the road, and that had been not used as a fire station, as I say, since about the First World War. So the auxiliary fire service was set up in a temporary fire station in the Albert Mill. And it's quite possible that a lot of the staff in the mill formed the members of the AFS. I don't particularly know that, it's extremely likely. I did actually go around there a few months ago having a little look and see if I could trace which part of the mill was used in that, with some old photographs that we've got here in the museum. I managed to locate it quite easily. 3 photographs here that show Milnrow Auxiliary Fire Service at the Albert Mill. I'll actually put them there for you. This is the side of Albert Mill which faces the petrol station on Dale Street there. I can't remember what it's called, but it's just opposite the slip in there. If you're in the petrol station looking at the mill, this is the side that you see, and the loading bay became a fire station during World War II. These are the vehicles just pulled just outside. So what you've got is a converted car or light vehicle, light van or something, been made into a fire engine. It's got a ladder on it, some accommodation for the men. Doesn't have a fire pump like a normal fire engine. It pulls a trailer fire pump. And these trailer fire pumps were issued by the government to every town, basically. And the idea was that they would find a vehicle which could pull that. This is the trailer pump in closer detail. And this one's being pulled by a converted car. The car's been made into a fire engine with a ladder tied to the top of it and everything. It was quite common. They used to use a lot of big American saloons. There was a few of them knocking about, you know, Packards and Studebakers and things, because they were far more powerful and rugged than the British cars we had, like Baby Austins and things. So a lot of these big American cars were highly prized as fire engines during the war. So there you can see the car. That car's got a Rochdale registration number, ADK, so it's a local Rochdale vehicle. It's probably only a couple of years old at the time. They were commandeered and you know, requisitioned and pressed into fire service. At the same time, other vehicles were pressed into services as ambulances, rescue trucks. The whole civil defence machine was a hodgepodge of improvised and requisitioned stuff. And that included the premises and particularly the vehicles, and the fire service was no different. There was a lot of this kind of sort of publicity and parades went on. It was aimed at recruiting, of course. So, I mean, a typical town that had a regular fire service, like Rochdale or Manchester, the auxiliary fire service would be grafted onto it and about 5 times as large. So Manchester had 200 firemen, regular firemen in the beginning of the war, but the auxiliary fire service establishment was 5,000. So that's how many they needed for the, you know, for the home front, as it were. So they completely outnumbered the what you might call a professional fireman. So recruiting was a big issue, and they could only use people that weren't going in the services because they would be sent abroad. So there were people who had to stay at home because they were either slightly unfit for the army or because they had protected occupations or whatever. And these auxiliary firemen would, I mean, they were mainly needed in the evening and overnight because the air raids, that's when the air raids happened. The theory was that the regular firemen could carry on and do their ordinary job, and the AFS would deal with the air raids. It was complete nonsense because one fire, you know, an air raid fire becomes a normal fire. How do you draw the line between it? You can't have a fire attended by 50 non-professional men while the firemen are sat in the fire station because it was an air raid. So it all became more integrated very, very quickly. That said, the auxiliaries had their own stations, their own equipment, their own uniforms, their own commanders and everything. They were trained by the regular firemen, and they were turned out by them and mobilised by them and so on. So this Albert Mill was a typical temporary fire station. And around Rochdale there were probably about another 15, 20. So Mellor Street bus depot, various cotton mills, they were all pressed into service. Garages, a lot of garages were used because there wasn't much motoring going on in the war. So there's a bit of capacity in the average village garage to use as a fire station for a while.